You can tell what firms are doing that because they're not just relying on what I call a founder's mentality to plan for the next generation. When I say founder's mentality, it's like when a firm doesn't do succession planning, it's really saying to every new generation, we're going to act as if you're starting this firm over again.
Welcome to On Record PR. I'm your host, Gina Rubel. Today, I'm going on record with David Wood, principal of David Wood Consulting. After a 38-year career as a corporate trial lawyer, and in the lead up to his retirement from an AmLaw 100 firm, Barnes Thornburg, David transitioned his entire $6 million practice to younger partners who his clients have come to know and now trust. So we're going to be talking about law firm retirement succession planning. And in the meantime, David is enjoying his retirement, teaching law firms how to do just that while he's all over the world with his surfboard. So if you are looking to surf someday and enjoy your retirement, David is the person you need to get to know. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Gina. Always a pleasure to see you.
So where in the world are you coming to us from this time?
I am in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, and surfing in the morning and evening and working on succession for the rest of the day. Just the way I like it.
Good for you, living the dream that you've always wanted. That is fantastic. And hopefully you can share some insights with our listeners today as well. So let's start with what is retirement succession planning?
So every law firm is going to succeed to somebody. You know, my generation, the baby boom generation, owns a disproportionate share of law firms just because we're the ones with the most experience. We're the ones typically with the biggest books of business. We've been around the longest. So that ownership is going to go someplace. It's going to go to somebody. It's an asset. The firm is an asset. It's going to be inherited by somebody. The question is, what value is it going to have when that generational transfer happens? And a lot of firms get, I think, sort of intoxicated by the success that the senior partners' generation of business, the building of the brand, the execution of, terrific legal services, all those things create, an abundance when you have, a very high performing generation of senior partners sort of fueling the machine. But inevitably, those people are going to be gone, just like the people that they succeeded in, the generation before that. My generation is going to be gone at some point. And the question is, what's going to be left when we're gone? Is a firm ready to does it have enough people to replace those dollars and revenue? Does it have people who are talented enough, who are good enough at marketing, good enough at business development to replace all that revenue? And bear in mind that there are a lot more of us than there are of the generation that comes beyond us. Baby boomers are just numerous. So the question that every firm has to really confront, and if it doesn't, it's sort of see no evil, hear no evil, because eventually we're going to be gone. Who's going to come after us? And that breaks down into two questions. One is, are the right people in the right numbers with the right talent ready to step in? And two, are my clients, my generation's clients, being made sticky enough so that they are retained by the firm, so that the partnership between that next generation, those rising stars, and the retention of my generation's clients come together for, a promising future and a sustainability that's predictable. Because, that's, if we're not thinking about succession, if we're not thinking about what happens when the current generation retires, the firm may be sustainable. It may not be. We just have no way of knowing.
So what are the obstacles to implementing an effective retirement succession program?
If you were to ask the CEOs, the COOs, the executive administrators, the managing partners of law firms, small to large, although this is less of an issue with large firms just because mistakes that are made when you have 3,000 lawyers generally get diluted in significance much more than they do with small or even mid-sized firms. But in any event, if you ask those folks, what irritates them the most, and they were willing to be candid with you, not everybody is for obvious reasons, is they wake up one day and they find that one of their partners has retired with no notice to anybody. And if there's no notice to the firm, you can bet there's no notice to their clients. Now, those leaders, those firm leaders, are left to clean up the mess that happens from that. You have unhappy clients who one day, simply don't have their relationship partners anymore, and they've got to go out and do all the work that it takes to replace those leaders, which is not inconsiderable. If we had with us today somebody from a corporate law department, a big corporation, and you ask them, what do you have to do to replace, a lawyer who's led your service team for years and years, they would roll their eyes and say, I've got to go out, I got to call up my peers, ask them for recommendations, I've got to put out an RFP, I've got to take interviews, I got to pick a candidate, and then even more of a pain in the neck than anything else, I've got to onboard them to my AP system. I've got to get onboard them to our conflicts management system. It's just one thing after another, and it really irritates them. So that's the feedback that those firm leaders are getting. Those are the phone calls that they get. They have obstacles internally, a lot of them, to solving that problem. One of them is that older partners don't want to talk about retirement. And if we don't talk about retirement, we don't know that key piece of information that lays the table for a successful succession plan. And that is knowing roughly when your partners are going to disappear. If you don't know when they're going to leave practice, then you're really vulnerable to that risk of, they're just being gone one day. Now, I think there's a lot of room to be flexible there because obviously plans change, expectations change, but you'd be surprised how few older partners really want to talk about retirement. And, I kind of get this because, when I got to the top of my career, I was blessed to be successful. And, my firm treated me like a rock star. Fortunately, I never really took to heart, thank goodness. But, my firm was wonderful to me. And, when I got to the pinnacle of my career, I was very aware that there was no place to go from there but down. And I'm not a golfer, but I know the difference between the front nine and the back nine. And I knew when I was teetering on the brink of the back nine. So, and there's a sensitivity that older partners have, that they're afraid that if, that one time they forget a word or have a senior moment that we have all the time, that when you reach a certain age and your client looks at you and says, is he starting to, has he crested? Is he about to be over the hill? And we are very sensitive about that. Another thing is that older partners, many have a fear of financial insecurity. Not financial insecurity, because, folks who have told me this, they got plenty of money. What they're afraid of, though, is that one day they're not going to get a paycheck anymore. And, they've gotten a paycheck for decades and decades. All of a sudden, they're not getting a paycheck anymore. It doesn't matter how much money they have. There's an insecurity to that wears us down. And we just really have to fight against that. I mean, we have to evolve into something other than lawyers. And if we can't do that, succession is going to be a very, very difficult thing for us.
So when you were at Barnes Thornburg, was Andy Deathridge the firm managing partner?
Actually, he wasn't until the last couple of years. Bob Grand was the managing partner, but Andy Deathridge was the practice chair of the insurance recovery group, which was my field, and he recruited me, and I think the world of Andy.
So I met him at a conference a few weeks ago, which is why I'm asking. And, we had a brief conversation, but one of the things that I got from that conversation is that the firm really is very supportive of its attorneys and is really looking to put in place ways for attorneys to succeed, which is, I think, part of the reason I would think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you were able to transition your entire $6 million practice to younger partners because you had the support of the firm behind you. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And for me, there's two answers to that question. One is structural. And Barnes Thornburg has its compensation structure really lends itself to giving senior partners who are on a runway to retirement the ability to put in those, I mean, for me, it was hundreds of non-billable hours that it took to really effectively transition my client relationships to my very talented younger partners. So Barnes Thornburg has, I think, very thoughtfully solved a problem that really plagues a lot of other law firms who don't protect their aging partners' compensation from erosion when they do that non-billable work. Barnes Thornburg is also just a very, very collegial partnership. I couldn't have been happier there. I think the world of my partners. But the other answer, for me, is Barnes Thornburg has a culture that really lends itself to supporting lawyers and partners in particular through the various phases of life, so that succession really happens as they go along. And one way they do that is they've grown very impressively, not just organically, but also through acquisition of laterals like me. I came over as a lateral hire. They put a lot of time and money into vetting laterals. I don't know how they do it, but the number of jerks that get through the net is very low. But you find out a lot about a law firm when you see what they do when no one is looking. And for me, that was about 6 months after I got to Barnes Thornburg, and I had no friends there, didn't know anybody really. I had a horrible personal tragedy. One of my children died. It's like the worst thing you could possibly imagine. And what followed was like the worst year of my life. And I totally, I had no expectations of how my partners were going to treat me, just no expectations at all. So I was completely overwhelmed. And frankly, I tear up even talking about it now by how I got cards and letters from partners, from associates, from the guys in the mailroom in Atlanta, who I'd never met, and some who I still haven't met. I had thousands of dollars in donations in lieu of flowers were given by Barnes Thornburg people. I came to work one day to find that, and the pane of glass next to my door in the office had an opaque strip on it. Someone had seen me weeping at my desk and wanted me to have more privacy. And above all, they hired a therapist for me unrequested. They did not cut my compensation, even though my business contracted, and I bounced back. Had just an awesome experience there. But I will tell you, I would run through small arms fire for my partners at Barnes Thornburg. And part of the work that I did in the last couple of years of my time there, of transitioning my clients to my seconds in command, which is a huge part of succession. If you can't get that right, then you got to replace all these clients. It's an enormous amount of work. But a big part of that for me was an act of gratitude for me. And I still feel it. I can never really repay Barnes Thornburg. But what I tell people at law firms is the amount of effort that partners put into that very, very time-consuming process of migrating their practice to the next generation. I think of it as a bell curve. And on one end of the bell curve are all those folks who, it doesn't matter what a firm does to try to motivate them. It doesn't matter what their promises are and their partnership agreements. They're never going to do anything to help their partners. They just aren't. And there's nothing you can do to change that. On the other end of the bell curve are going to be people like me, hopefully very few, who have very strong personal reasons, very strong, just deeply, deeply personal reasons for putting that time in. But almost everybody else is somewhere at the top of the bell curve. And, what I talk to law firms about is you got to replace my generation. And a key piece of replacing my generation is keeping my generation's clients. Not the only piece, because you also got to bring up the right people in the right numbers to fill in what happens around the migration of my generation's practice to the next. And if you don't do those things, then, revenue is going to start to erode at some point. And once that happens, when law firms collapse, they collapse really fast. And it's usually just a perception that revenue, a drop in revenue is not going to be reversible. And then the whole thing goes up in smoke. But, on that bell curve, if we can move the needle toward the positive end of the bell curve, that's where the success of effective succession planning really shows itself. You can tell what firms are doing that because they're not just relying on what I call a founder's mentality to plan for the next generation. When I say founder's mentality, it's like when a firm doesn't do succession planning, it's really saying to every new generation, we're going to act as if you're starting this firm over again, except that you've got the brand, you've got the goodwill, you've got the offices, you've got the employees, you've got the platform for service delivery. But if you're not keeping the last generation's clients, in effect, you're starting the firm over every generation.
So, David, I want to take a quick pause because I love what you just said. And then we're going to take a message from our sponsor and come right back.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses internationally. With an expert team of professionals positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by international affiliates, Furia Rubel enhances its clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams with media relations, media and crisis training, and client and talent acquisition and retention. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
So we're here with David Wood, and we're talking about law firm succession planning. And can you, David, repeat what you just said? It was brilliant, and I just want to really push that concept one more time.
Of course. So when a law firm, and so many law firms, vast majority, if firms are really being, not kidding themselves, they're really relying on the force of the talent and the personalities and the brilliance of every new generation to start the firm over again. Because if you're not keeping the clients of the preceding generation, you're starting your client list all over again. Now, of course, it's staggered because obviously, partners are coming up through the ranks all the time, and they don't resign en masse, they don't arrive en masse. But if I call it a founder's mentality, one of the ways that firms say, I don't really need to do succession planning because I've got these brilliant lawyers who are brilliant now. They're going to keep being brilliant. They are going to, rise into the leadership positions now occupied by the senior partners. And they're going to keep making this firm that, the same successful place that the retiring senior partners have done so well. And what I say to them is, okay, I get that. It's not an unreasonable way to plan the succession of your business, except that, what if it doesn't work? Let's say let's talk about a mid-sized firm that's maybe got 100 equity partners. And the plan is, the people coming up through the ranks are so talented, they're simply going to move in, do an awesome job, just like this current generation did. And they're going to generate business. They're going to build new clients. They're going to have relationships. They're going to replace the outgoing generation. And all will be well. Well, essentially, they're starting the firm over again with each new generation of partners. Because what they're doing is they're buying into a platform for service delivery. And as long as that platform is there with the goodwill, with the brand that, is going to continue to give them, a boost in marketing, a boost in business development, and, everything is surging forward, everybody's growing, everybody's making money, then you can forget about succession because you're starting the firm over again every generation. We've seen a lot of firms, not a huge number of firms, but, amazing number of storied firms who have failed, who once were very, very profitable. And all of a sudden, they reach a tipping point where a key practice area or, a number of partners leaves. And there's no single formula on what it takes, because it's all about perception. When partners perceive that something irreversible has just happened in the management of the firm or in the operation of the firm, that, a lot of times, it might be some event, but it becomes more than that, because they say, well, maybe, he lost this big governor, this big monitorship for the government on some foreign corporation. That was a lot of money that came in the last 5 years. but we have a plan for bouncing back from that. And the partners say, okay, that makes sense. But when that event happens where there's a hit to revenue and partners don't really have faith in either the leadership to solve problems, and that there's a lot of that going around, or just sort of feel like they don't really have the confidence in their partners that they wish that they did, all of a sudden an avalanche effect can start happening. And that's the danger that law firms face when they don't have a carefully thought out, pre-thought out, well in advance succession plan. Because a succession plan is the antidote to that avalanche effect. When partners start expressing dissatisfaction at an existential level, that's when your professional managers have to step in and say, wait a second, here's the plan for getting out of whatever the challenge is that just happened to us. Here's the plan for replacing all those folks who are making us so successful, making us so profitable before we have this setback. Here's the plan for getting out of the setback, not just for, it's not events focused, it's not transactional in nature. Here's the whole backdrop of the firm. The sustainability of the firm hasn't changed. We have a plan. We're staying the course. It allows us to deal with setbacks without having to worry about the basic sustainability of the firm in the first place. But, those laterals, they have a lot of options, and they do due diligence. And one of the questions they ask is, who's going to replace you guys and gals? Who's going to replace the folks who are recruiting me? And if they don't have an answer to that question, a lot of laterals are going to say, well, I have other options from firms that have a good answer to that question. That's
a great point. And we only have a couple of minutes left, so I would really love you to share some things that law firms should be doing now that can start to set them up for success as it relates to partner succession planning.
I think the first thing is a firm has to ask itself where it wants its revenue to be in the next 5 to 10 years when the current big producers are gone. And if the answer is right where we are now, then that's the number they've got to get to. The first place I would recommend you start with is, what's the number that you can hold on to by keeping client relationships with the partners that are leaving practice. Now, 100% of those people are never going to stay. There's always an attrition factor. So adjusting for that attrition factor, a firm can say, okay, I have $100 million here in client relationships and annual revenue that retiring partners' clients have been generating up till now. I think I can reasonably expect to keep that. That's some fraction of the whole. So whatever that revenue amount is, whether it's staying the course, whether it's achieving growth, that's when you got to ask yourself, what's the objective? That objective number minus that 100 million is what you got to have a plan to replace. And you've got to make sure that your plan to keep that 100 million is rock solid too. Now, these are not, these don't take a genius to figure out. Succession is something that when done methodically and thoughtfully, it is hard to do. It's not easy, or else everybody would be doing it. But it's not complicated. It just takes sitting down, figuring it out. It takes sitting down and making the financial commitments to it, which are not enormous compared to things like lateral acquisition. Succession planning is low impact. But you do those things, and now you can look at each other in a management committee meeting and say, we're not guessing about sustainability anymore. We've got a plan.
What I hear you saying is it's about running a business. It's about thinking of the practice of law as a business. It's about bringing the right junior partners or younger partners along for the ride. And it's really about firm culture, because you were able to do this because there was a culture that allowed for it. It wasn't just push them out the door and see what happens with the clients. And so, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth. That's what I believe I'm hearing, and wanted to give it a quick recap. Do you have any parting thoughts or things that you want to share with our audience before we wrap up?
I would encourage the leadership of law firms to take a leap of faith with their retiring partners with the rising stars, so that everybody sits down and says, okay, we're not going to leave what the new owners in 10 years or 15 years, or 20 years, what those new owners are going to inherit. We're not going to leave that to chance. We owe that to them. We owe them a legacy that has been carefully thought out. Let's sit down and do it now so that when we retire, we leave this firm better off than when we found it.
I would think the clients are going to be asking, what are you doing for your succession planning as well? So my gut is that you're here to really help law firms succeed in their future endeavors. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us today, David. I appreciate your time. I'm a little bit jealous of where you're coming from. Maybe someday I'll get back down there. But I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to On Record PR. I want to remind them that they can visit our website, onrecordpr.com, subscribe to the show, share it with friends and colleagues, check out our show notes. So if you can't listen in your office, you could always read and find all the information that our listeners need, including how to contact David. And as always, we welcome guests and topic ideas at podcasts at onrecordpr.com. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks, David.
Thanks a million, Gina.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson-Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Željko Tomic of Compost Media Flow.